Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's discuss few more tips on how to plan for CSS exam. On vocabulary, there are four or five things. The very first important thing is common roots and prefixes and suffixes. If you know 200 or 300 roots, that would multiply your vocabulary by 3, 4, 5 times. So that means 200 roots means maybe 1000 or more words. So for that, Norman Levis book is good, but you can get any book which gives the roots of the common roots of the words. Here is just an example. If we have a chance to look at the etymology, it's also called etymology or the root of the word, we then tend to kind of remember it. Circumlocution, the circum word, circumference, circumcision, locution. You will find it many places. Loquacious. So we can figure out even from the structure of the word sometimes the meanings as well. Here are just few more examples. The next important thing for vocabulary is frequently using thesaurus. On one word, there would be shades of different of meanings and different words expressing the same concept. Not exactly the same concept, but kind of a similar concept. For instance, commonplace or dull or boring. We have a variety of words, which each of which is has a slightly different tone and used in different context. For which there's a very good book by Reader's Digest if you can find somewhere using the right word. Another idea for vocabulary is using flashcards. Flashcards, there's a typical way how to effectively use it. Take 10 to 20 flashcards of the new words that you come across, or you can take high frequency words from the SAT or TOEFL lists as well. Take 10, 15, or 20, not more than that, and just keep it in your pocket, shuffle it, and repeat it 3, 4 times a day. Just look at all of them. And at the end of the day, you have to look at once more before you sleep because sleep has a lot of influence on how our memory works. So lots of things are saved during sleep and lots of things are deleted also during sleep. So the first thing you do in the morning is look at those flashcards, yesterday's flashcards, very quickly, and if any of them does not come to your mind, just put it aside. That means our brain has not saved that. So we will continue that today, the next day, I mean. And so, for example, there were 20 cards. We remember the meaning of 16, but the four we couldn't. The four we will take aside and we'll add 16 more and make 20 for the next day. So that's the typical way how the flashcards can help. Having a vocabulary journal or a vocabulary notebook, that is very important and really helps. This vocabulary journal is not just only for the new word that you come across. Yes, by all means you have to write those new words also in that, and later you can convert it into flashcards, or when you find time you can see the detailed meanings or etymology of those words. But sometimes you have to just read some authentic writers piece of essay or anything from a book, and just look at how they are using adverbs and adjectives and beautiful expressions. Those expressions which just attract you, you can write down on your vocabulary journal. It's a use or lose thing. So occasionally you have to just go through your vocabulary journal, and particularly when you are going to write an essay or something, or you have an exam the next day, that vocabulary journal brushes up your vocabulary to a good extent. So this is very important. Okay, the next step is how to use this vocabulary so that we don't lose it. An important thing to understand is that our reading vocabulary is larger. You say can a bigger set, our writing vocabulary is always lesser than the reading vocabulary. uh, you can understand it very easily that there are lots of words that we come across in our reading and we know their meanings. But when we are writing, we use a limited number of words. We don't use all those words that we can really we know about, because they are in our memory, but they don't come upfront into our mind while we are writing. And our speaking vocabulary is even less. I'm talking particularly in English, because our language has not been kind of developed in the way our primary mother tongue has been developed. In mother tongue, the things might be different. For example, I am Punjabi. My speaking vocabulary is much more than my writing or reading vocabulary. But in English as a foreign language, this is how it typically happens. The numbers I have written just fictitiously, but it's something like this. So our target is that eventually, obviously, the exam is about writing and our interview is about speaking. We have to convert more and more of our reading vocabulary into writing vocabulary. That comes only by writing. So writing 3 4 times a week, just even 15 20 minutes on any subject, on any event that happened yesterday, or any thought that's coming to your mind, it really helps a lot. You'll notice that starting off, making the opening sentence, sometimes takes quite a lot of time. Don't worry. It's like bicycle riding. Riding comes by writing. So if you have, sometimes you will notice that you kind very good expressions, and although you just throw away this whatever you write, but those expressions will still come to surface again the next time you are writing on a similar or a kind of identical topic. So that really helps. Okay, now some ideas on essay writing. The very first thing we should know is that essay is not a stockpiling or juxtaposition of a lot of information on a topic. It is a format in which information or key ideas are to be logically presented. And the good thing is that you will have variety of topics in the exam. It's simply not possible that you don't have any topic which you feel like writing. The 10 or 12 topics, you will find 1 2 of them which you can really think about. So I have just taken one for example. The topic we have chosen is why our children are not attracted to the schooling process, why they don't like to go to school. So how do we'll go about it? Let's model a little bit. On the topic, I'll take a rough piece of paper and I'll try to find out, for example, let me look at the causes, why it's happening. It's just a kind of a brainstorming. I'm generating my thoughts, bringing up my memories, some facts, some opinions, some information. So maybe the method of teaching, maybe they're not motivated, same maybe the same routine every day, they get bored. So all of those ideas that comes to me regarding the topic in terms of the causes of this problem. This I have taken just one typical format. All those causes I just write down, and in the next step, I find out what are the effects of this. So our problem is children don't like to go to school. The effect is then obviously they don't love learning, and parents get disturbed. It causes depression. They lag behind in their economic and life struggles, and we then have to relate that are really the causes leading to these sort of effects. So that's how essay is essentially about gathering those information and generating those ideas first around the topic. This process is important. So the next process is then how do the ideas that we have generated, we have to synthesize them. What are the 4 or 5 key ideas that come out of it? So we will take those 4 or 5 key ideas, and on those key ideas, we have to write down our thoughts. One idea will go in 1 or 2 paragraphs. So, but there is an introduction and there is a conclusion. Introduction should be captivating and it should give a hint to in a sort of conclusion. For example, if we find out that there are a lot of environmental factors and that the teacher training issues and there is a content issues in why children get bored. So we will give a hint in the introduction that the fact is that there are lots of variables that play a critical role in making learning fun in the school, and environmental factor, teacher trainings, and there are a host of other factors which play an important part. For example, this sort of, and you can take one factor, another factor, three, four factors, and if you have lots many factors, then you can at the end always give the diversity of those factors in one or two paragraphs before you make a conclusion. And in the conclusion and introduction is essentially the same thing, but just the tone is different. That of all these word views and perspectives, it depends. It's very contextual, and it's a matter of how, where are you coming from, and what's your situation, sort of stuff. So it's essentially those four or five ideas, and certain things are important. Don't give headings in the essays, because if you give headings in the essays, you get stuck up in the heading, and it blocks your flow of writing. So that's what it is. Don't try to give so much of a data statistics. The paragraph should be logically connected. That process that goes before writing, that's the idea generation and consolidating and taking those three, four thoughts. That's the main process that you have to do. Thank you. Okay, now on precis writing. Let's say we have a paragraph which we have to write, summarize. When we say summarize, that means we have to bring it down to one third of the original paragraph. The first thing is counting the number of words. It's very simple. Just take an approximate count of how many words are appearing in one line. Let's say in this case we have 10 words in a line and there are 17 lines. So that means about 170 words. So one third of that is about 55, or kind of you can say 60. So the process is simple. Read it two, three times. Don't just read it once and jump to start writing. Read it two, three times, then pause, then try to figure out what are the main ideas that come to it. So, what is one or more key ideas or facts or opinions that have been stated in it? And sometimes there are words that are not in your vocabulary. Those words you have to figure out from the contextual clues, from what sort of story or narrative is coming. Just try to judge or try to estimate from that. This is the first step. Then you have to write it down in your own words and count your what you have written. If it's a little bit more than one third, then you have to do a little bit of a surgery. So it's a sort of iterative process, and second, third iteration you come down to level which is one third or less. So the good thing to practice about this is you can take any of your Pakistan studies or that sort of book, but these editorial of newspaper is really good stuff to for experimenting on that. Just hide their headings, read it, try to condense it, and then try to propose your own heading, and later you can see whether your heading and the heading which the editor had given do they really correspond, have you really conceived the main thought. Okay, next, how to read a book is very important. Book reading has three phases or three layers. When you first take a book, you should skim the book. Skimming again has two steps. First of all, you look at the title of the book. We sometimes ignore the title of the book itself is important. For example, the struggle for Pakistan. The word itself is telling what sort of what authors really wants to convey the struggle. And look at what's written on the backside about the author. See, go through the contents. That's important. And read the preface. Sometimes we ignore the preface. Preface should never be ignored because preface says what author wants to tell, why he has written, and how he has organized his thoughts, and how you can, the reader can best benefit from the book. So that is skimming. And the second part of the skimming is then go through each chapter and start looking at the subheadings, and if there are few insects and figures, just go through them. It will take half an hour, 1 hour. Go through the entire book and you will have a good idea. Then you start reading the book, which is called analytical reading. Analytical reading, you take the chapter, but again, the chapter you take a bigger view, skim through the chapter, look at all its. Sometimes the conclusions or the key points are given in the beginning in the textbook, particularly, but in most of your books it might not be the case. But if there are given any conclusions or those things, do read them. Even read them first, no problems, and then start your reading. How you will do your reading, paragraph by paragraph, will come next. So, and at the end, when you have done this analytical reading, the final step is think about it, that what were the key thoughts. A book has organized, the author has organized his narrative and story into his own buckets. You just forget about those buckets. You have to organize in your own thoughts, okay, what was the whole and what were the main components, how those components make the whole, and what was really missing, what you felt, the question that you had which the book is not answering. Try to figure out those questions. So that's how typically you try to absorb the book. And Mortimer Adler, I earlier in the past last video I mentioned. If you've come across that book, that's a really good book. How to read a book. It's a classic on that. Typically, when you're going from paragraph to paragraph, to remain focused, it's better that when you read a paragraph, try to make some marginal notes around it. It has a lot of other benefits. It will give you a practice, a lot of good practice on precis writing, how to take out the condensed idea or distilled idea out of this paragraph. Those marginal notes should be very, very, very brief. Initially, when you start writing, that might be a little more, but later you can even further condense it. This paragraph I made marginal notes and I have further condensed it. Later you will find out when you're repeating, you don't repeat the entire paragraph. You just look at your own marginal notes and entire book is just rewinding in your mind. An important point while reading a book is that we shouldn't be judgmental. We shouldn't just hurry to make our own opinion about what author wants to say. It's like listening. Just keep our biases aside and try to listen what author is saying. We can always have our questions that we want to be answered and explored. Author might be giving answer to those questions, but obviously it's different from the dialogic conversation. But our author tries to explain, and some of our answers the author might not explain. That was not the purpose of his writing. So be neutral, try to listen to the author, and then you can add always your own views to it. Thank you. So that's how it works. I've just taken Pakistan Affairs or Islamiyat as an example. In Pakistan Affairs, when you have gone through uh, one or two main books, you'll find out uh, that actually there are only a few incidents, maybe 10 or 12. So, what typically I did and many students do is make a chronology, make a cloth line. Maybe you can do it in your room. Okay, from 1857, let's say, to 1900, there are one or two situation things that happened, and then you take every 10 years, one decade, and find out. In one decade, you will find out there is hardly one or two major incidents, and everything is around them. So, and there are three parties: Congress, Muslims, and British. So, if there is any incident, it's the Lucknow Pact. What comes to your mind is what happens before Lucknow Pact. That we you will recall the circumstances prevailing, and what happened in the Lucknow Pact is obviously you're supposed to know, and what happened after. Then you can write the total narrative of that. So this sort of cloth line or really helps because you tend to make your own story out of it. Go where there are only 4 or 5 major incidents, and actually one or two incidents in each decade. That's all. The story is very simple, and that's how you continue onwards as well till today. Islamiyat is also a mandatory subject. Sometimes we, as students, a little bit try to or tend to ignore this subject, as particularly the Muslims. Oh, I know this subject, and there are a lot of casualties in the subject. So, the issue is that you are going into a position which is a very responsible position. So, the Islamiyat expects from you to know whatever those topics are, namaz, tawheed, etc. How does it impact you as an individual, as a family, as a society, as a nation state, as an ummah, as humanity? So, on each topic or segment, the system or sociological approach, that's important. How it puts accountability and privileges at various levels, from individual to ecosystem. Secondly, how good you are convinced that it's better than the other worldviews that exist on the same. For example, the family, the West has a different concept of the family now. And how come this concept or Islam's concept really makes sense about that. So do go through Asas Islam and Islamiyat Hayat and with that perspective in mind. Next is I have just gathered suggested books. We already discussed that on books, there are two things that we shouldn't do as candidate. One, don't just go to the market and pick any number of books, because there are too many books out there, and you can't really know what to read, and you don't have that luxury of time to do it in 10 years. Number two, uh, always ask from the CSS successful candidates who had opted that subject that you're looking for, and ask for the subjects. Luckily, I requested one of my colleagues, and he gathered those suggested readings on various subjects, which I'll display on the next slide. You can pause and write down. Hope that will help you a lot. There is a list of readings given in the FPSC brochures or material. That list actually candidates don't care about, because it's too long. You need a lifetime then to do the CSS. If you go through that 14 books for sociology and 20 books for Pakistan, you can't do that. So for each 100 books, this is actually one or two books, and the few topics are left which you have to see another thing. So that's the formula. So look at the books, take these books, and start your things. So that's all about it. We will talk about psychological test and interview, which is essentially about essential communication, how to respond to question questions, and how to handle. So for today, it's okay. Hope these things will you can benefit from these. Good luck. Thank you very much.